Friday, and this is your dose. Well, it finally happened. No, the world isn't coming to an end. Quite the opposite, actually. Australia's bush has finally stopped burning. You may be thinking, that's old news, mate. We're on to the next disaster now. Well, despite slow media coverage, the fires actually kept burning until early March, and we are just now able to assess the damage. Here are the stats. This fire was the worst we have ever seen, more than 10 times worse than usual. It incinerated over 21% of the entire Australian bush and burned for 240 straight days. At least 450 estimated are dead, 93% as a result of air pollution. Over 3,500 homes were lost, 1 billion animals have died, and the future of up to 100 threatened species is now in jeopardy. In the end, 18.6 million hectares of land went up in smoke, which, for reference, is 2/3 the area of New Zealand. For our international viewers, that's a landmass the size of North Dakota getting completely wiped out. Now, I know what some of you Americans are saying. Who the hell cares about North Dakota? Well, I'm pretty sure there's some grass fields, or at least a few bison, or something that would be terribly inconvenienced. As for Australia, while scientists were anticipating a bad fire season this year, even they were surprised by the complete and utter destruction. Current models didn't predict this kind of event to happen for another 80 years. Climate change is here, and it's ahead of schedule. One of the most troubling stats is that the fires released an estimated 900 million tons of CO2, as per Will Steffen of the Climate Council of Australia. This is more than 1.5 times what Australia emits in an entire year from all sources. Now, usually the CO2 released from fires are recaptured during regrowth, as trees suck up all that dirty CO2 to grow their hard-throbbing wood. However, with increasing climate change, the bush may never regrow to its original size, and thus the CO2 released may end up contributing to a positive feedback cycle that continues to fuel this growing climate crisis. Fun, right? But wait, there's more. Apart from greenhouse gases, the bushfire released outrageous amounts of deadly smoke pollution, smothering the Australian capital Canberra with the worst air quality in the world in early Jan. In New South Wales, the state hit the hardest by these fires. 94% of the time, they had air pollution greater than normal levels. The smoke even made it as far as South America, traveling some 11,000 kilometers across the Pacific. We even saw it here in New Zealand, giving the sky an ominous, apocalyptic feel. Little did we know. Well, as it turns out, the inhalation of these smoke particles is bad for you. Like, really bad. The pollution was estimated to kill 10 times more people than the number killed at the front of these fires. And 60% of the Australian population was affected by this air pollution. Since the smoke from bushfires contains known cancer-causing chemicals, the actual health impacts will likely be felt for years to come. This is especially true for vulnerable populations, such as infants and children, whose short-term exposure to wildfire smoke could create lung function and immune response issues that last a lifetime. So how did we get this bad this quick? Well, Australia has been prone to raging fires pretty much since its existence. It gets hot, it gets dry, and its trees burn easily. Take, for instance, the eucalyptus tree. It contains a large amount of highly flammable eucalyptus oil that is basically the natural version of pouring gasoline on a fire. In fact, the plant is so used to fires, it has evolved to regenerate growth directly from fire damage, like a real-life phoenix rising from the ashes. Pretty cool. What isn't so cool is the trend of global temperatures lately. Australia had its hottest year ever recorded in 2019. In fact, 9 out of the 10 hottest years ever recorded in Australia have come since 2005. It was also in the middle of the worst drought it had ever seen, having an unusually dry year in 2018, followed by the driest it had ever seen in 2019. These red spots here are where the worst ever values were measured. Tough situation. It is well known that greenhouse gases like CO2 contribute to increasing global temperatures, but climate change can also impact the frequency and severity of weather events via ocean current systems. Allow me to explain. In 2019, Australia was on the wrong end of the ocean current known as the Indian Ocean Dipole. The Indian Ocean Dipole is similar to its more famous cousin, El Niño.
El Niño is Spanish for the Niño.
Actually, El Niño is roughly translated to the child, as the phenomenon was originally called El Niño de Navidad because it brought warm waters during Christmas to the Americas. Quick recap: when El Niño
I am El Niño
occurs, the Americas get weather like tropical storms, while on the other side of things in Australia, they get droughts. The Indian Ocean Dipole is a similar concept. When it is in positive mode, wetness is sucked towards Africa, causing wet weather, while once again Australia is dry. When both happen during similar time periods, Australia gets completely boned. 2018 was an El Niño year, and in 2019 there was one of the most extreme Indian Ocean dipoles on record. So when you hear that climate change will bring more extreme weather events, these are the types of systems scientists may be referring to, where you can have droughts in Australia and floods in Africa happening simultaneously, as was the case in 2019. On top of high temperatures and lack of rain, there was another factor that's basically giving the middle finger straight to Australia: the Southern Annular Mode. Now, the Southern Annular Mode, or SAM, is a wind pattern in the southern hemisphere that controls short-term weather. During the bushfires this past summer, it was higher than normal, meaning the westerly winds were passing through the outback and bringing dry air east, literally fanning the flames of the bushfires. In the end, it was a perfect storm. Think of Australian bushfires as a high school house party. The drought is the parents leaving for the weekend. Without your parents to rain on the party, the number of people allowed into the house increases substantially. The elevated temperatures are the presence of cheap alcohol. The greater the temperatures, the greater the chance something will escalate. And the Sam, well, let's think of Sam as this kid, the young bloke who is pushing everyone to have the party of the century. Put it all together, and the results are disastrous.
Then we thought we might as well just have a bit of a party, and then it sort of just got out of hand, and yeah.
Well, 500 people turned up, the air wing of the police force, the dog squad, your neighbours' cars were being destroyed. What have your parents had to say, Corey?
I haven't really talked to them because every time they call, I don't answer. Because, yeah, they'll probably try to kill me.
Not helpful, kid. As climate change continues, the number of times Sam's parents are gone will increase, the length of their trip will increase, and the number of goon sacks his wild mates will drink will also increase, helping fuel ragers like the bushfires we saw last year. Okay, so we know that Australia was set up for disaster. But what actually started these fires? Well, despite what you may have heard on social media, this rampage was not the consequence of arsonists capitalizing at an opportune time. It was lightning. The answer is lightning.
Raiden wins.
Dry lightning is responsible for most of the natural bushfires across the planet. Now, I know there were popular articles on the interwebs that spread like, well, wildfire, claiming that nearly 200 arsonists were arrested for lighting the bush. Lo and behold, this number was a misrepresentation, as only 24 were arrested for lighting bushfires, according to New South Wales Police. But the number of arsonists isn't even the important statistic here. It's the amount of damage they actually caused. In New South Wales, about 1% of all burn area was from arson, while that number was closer to 3% in Queensland. Now, 3% is still a large amount considering how much bush actually burned. So yes, arson is still a very real problem in Australia. However, claiming an arson emergency is responsible for the entire bushfire crisis is misleading at best and, well, at worst, intentionally deceptive. Dr. Timothy Graham at the Queensland University of Technology looked at the Twitter feeds with the hashtag arson emergency and found some very suspicious behavior of many accounts with bot-like activities that pushed a climate denial agenda. Here's one tweet that says, "With the vast majority of fires being deliberately lit, a better hashtag for the bushfires instead of climate emergency would be arson emergency. If arsonists are responsible, perhaps find ways to counter arsonists. Or does that make too much sense?" Now, that last line, or does that make too much sense, is emotionally appealing because it invokes the reader to agree with something that is laid out in such a seemingly obvious manner. It brazenly reinforces the reader's intelligence for coming to an apparently logical conclusion, and its flippant approach dismisses everyone else dumb enough to blindly follow a different social narrative. This is dangerous. It sows distrust in not only climate change, but the media that report it. This entire tweet is based on false information, and it is a prime example of blatant propaganda. Here's another example of a bot-like response to a credible article in Scientific American written by Dr. Narili Abram, one of the leading experts in Australian climate research. She is behind a lot of the work on the Indian Ocean dipole I talked about earlier. But here her story was immediately dismissed without evidence by an account pushing climate change denial. On social media, a world expert has the same voice as a bot. At this point, we can't really say where this social media activity is coming from, but we do have an idea about its purpose. These types of disinformation campaigns are becoming recognized more and more frequently across the planet. They can push certain agendas, or they can be used as a tool of misinformation itself to cause confusion, create doubt, and foster division. This weakens us all, and it is a playbook that was originally popularized by the Soviet Union, as explained here by former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov.
What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
That was back in 1984. Now we live in a world with more information than ever, and it has never been more important to understand the sources of what we consume. For instance, people who rely on Facebook for news are statistically less informed than those that do not. And what your favorite media personality says might be fun to listen to, but what they say is not credible if they don't cite a legitimate primary source. And in the world of knowledge, no source is better than something published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Recognizing misleading content is a difficult task, but one that we must train ourselves to do. When reading an article, ask yourself, is the publisher credible? Has it been published recently, or is it recycled content? What is the quality of the article? So valid sources and scientific literature use correct grammar and refrain from unprofessional texts, such as the use of all caps, whenever possible. And you should also read the piece to find out if it is well written, instead of just the headlines. Sometimes editors can misrepresent the story the authors are trying to tell by using flashy or catchy wordplay. After that, if you are still unsure, do some of your own research, like fact-checking the content using a site like factcheck.org. Together, we need to fight misinformation and promote credible sources, such as the research of scientists and experts, even if it goes against our personal feelings. Because at the end of the day, feelings aren't the ones that can save the planet.
Seemingly forgotten in the rush to fit up climate change as the cause of these fires was one highly relevant fact. Arsonists were responsible for many, if not most, of the blazes. It is hard to overlook crucial facts such as how the fires actually started.